And you have the National Super Alliance demonstrators were outside just a few moments ago being dispersed. Police officers that have been manning these premises, tear gassing those protesters that were getting rowdier by the moment. And we've also seen other protests around. But let's listen to the man himself, his thoughts on all that is going on around the country at this very critical point. Thank you for making time for KTN News, sir. What do you make of the protest? We saw protesters out here with banners saying Chiluba must go.
Well, first of all, you should be stating that you are seeking refuge from the from the tear gas. That's how we came here. Well, as you can see, first of all, is that we're in the office. We are working, doing what we're supposed to be doing, and yeah, I mean. Protests, people have the constitutional right to protest, to be able to state what the issues are. But at the end of the day, I think what will help the country move forward is how you put together those issues, package them in a way that is a solution that will help the country to be able to progress. Knowing that you have 29 days to the election, and the Commission has still got the mandate to be able to do that. We've got not much time left. So what we just have to do now is to try as much as possible to bring all stakeholders on board and to ensure that we're getting ready for this election. And saying that, you know, the chair has already invited the presidential candidates for a meeting tomorrow. We hope they'll show up so that we have some constructive dialogue to address the issues that have been raised by the different stakeholders. The intention being that as a country must be able to pull together to make progress.
Right. Yeah. Is it your statement today that you as CEO IEBC do not intend to resign?
Well, I've not thought about that. What I know is that I got responsibility before me, and I have to discharge that responsibility. Of course, those who raise concerns, and you can say that people have a right to express themselves, but whatever we do, we must be able to do it within the confines of the law. And given the nature of this office, we've been here before, and we need to learn from the past, even as we look into the future.
Yeah. The Supreme Court ruling annulling the presidential election, a serious historical moment for this country. Do you take no responsibility in that annulment?
Look, the Supreme Court was also very clear in terms of the observations that they made in as far as the election is concerned. And it's a phrase that they used, that if there was any issue around failure, is a systemic problem, is a system problem within the institution that we need to focus on, and actually used phrases like reflection. And if you understand the history of this commission, and I watched KTN this morning, they were looking at the history of the institution, the ECK days, the IIEC days, then of course the IEBC, which can be divided into the Isaac Hassan's IEBC and Wafula Chebukati's IEBC. We've always been in transition. And if there have been any challenges to be addressed in the electoral process, you can actually see that the way in which we've attempted to address those challenges is not a magic bullet. It's not something that you have to fix with one action. You have to look at it from a system perspective. Mm-hmm. And if you look at where we've come from in the last 2-3 years, trying to address some of the systemic challenges in the electoral process, I can say without fear of contradiction that we've made significant progress compared from where we've come from. And the issue is, are we going to build on the successes that we've achieved so far, or are we going to undo most of these good actions for the sake of the short-term gains? Yeah. So as a country, we must learn on how to build institutions for the long term.
For the long term, you talk about systems and that those must be allowed to work, but that doesn't work in a vacuum. Again, we go back to the issue of personnel, of staff, of people running these systems, because the push now is people feel in NASA and others that the buck should stop with you. That as the CEO of the Secretariat, some people cannot continue to be in office, head of ICT, as we've also had been cited, and other officials, because these systems are run by people, aren't they?
That's true, and we've got 800 people who are on a permanent basis. And the reason for that is that each and every person plays a critical role in the electoral process. So that unless you pinpoint and say at this particular point a certain officer had the following duty, he or she did not discharge that particular duty, it will be very difficult to say you're addressing a systemic issue by pinpointing individuals. I think there's a political side to this, but again, I'll repeat this. You must look at solutions that are going to consolidate gains for the long term. Today, it is me or my colleagues. Tomorrow, it will be someone else because of the short-term gains that we're trying to pursue. So from my own experience, I think that the country has to calm down from anxiety and tension and see what is it that we can do to ensure that the next election meets the standards that the Supreme Court said it has to meet.
Okay, so in as far as we had the 8th of August election, we now have the 26th of October election. What is the difference between that IEBC on the 8th of August and the one we will see going into the 26th in all aspects, whether it's personnel, whether it's your infrastructure, whether it's your partnering in systems and other issues?
What we've done so far is to look at the observations made by the Supreme Court. It's very clear that we must rethink our infrastructure, especially when it comes to resource management, both in terms of the procedure and the systems that we've put in place. So what we're going to see is that the procedure will vary a little bit. In the last election, based on the Court of Appeal decision, we had taken the position that there was no need for us to deal with Form 34S at the National Tallying Center because they will have been processed by the constituency returning officers. Remember that the Court of Appeal had said the results at that particular point are final. So what the National Returning Officer was to do was to receive the 290 forms from the respective constituencies. But this time around, what the Supreme Court is saying is that now we have to bring all those forms together, verify one against the other, and that will have an implication in terms of how we spread out our officers and how we set out, how we deploy our technology so that we have some sense of seamlessness from the polling station, the constituency, and the National Tallying Center. I think that's the main issue. The other bit is a complementary mechanism when it comes to results transmission. What will be the alternative to failure in terms of transmission? We think that we must come up with a clear procedure that is well communicated to all stakeholders so that we are all on the same page. If you ask us, I think we did quite a lot of work in the last election, but it appears that not many of our stakeholders came along with us. So that's one of the greatest lessons that we learned. And that's why when the chairman says, let's sit down and dialogue, he basically wants to bridge the gap of information between what we know as a process of the election and what our stakeholders ought to know as a process of the election.
And let's talk more about the stakeholders, because the National Super Alliance, for instance, we saw Raila Odinga lead the other principals for a meeting a few weeks ago, and the Jubilee side was not here. The Deputy President showed up later. There have been attempts to get the sides to talk. That has not happened. NASA has made the irreducible minimums known to the Commission. They say the same have not been addressed by the Commission. So they wonder what is the point of talking if so far the Commission has not shown any good faith?
No, I think the Commission has gone out of its way. You saw the chair wrote yesterday and he invited all the stakeholders. I think the question is whether the stakeholders really want to have these matters resolved. Yeah, that's a simple question. Do the stakeholders want these matters resolved? We're open, we've invited them, we've gone out of the way, and we are still open to have that particular conversation.
But you've not been able to have a meeting with all of them at the table at the same time. What is the problem there?
And that's why I'm pushing back to them and saying, why can't you come as per our invitation? The chair has invited them. He set out the agenda for the meeting, and we hope that by tomorrow all of them will come together.
Yeah. There's a concern right now, and we've seen NASA flag it as well, because one of the reducible minimums is that Al Ghurair does not print the ballot papers for the forthcoming election. And we hear that the UNDP will be procuring the new printers. And they said that was a unilateral decision without consultation, which is what they'd indicated they wanted to happen.
Well, again, there's a bit of mixed information out there. The position is that the Commission has a contract with Al Ghurair, an existing contract, a 2-year contract, to allow us to print ballot papers whenever we require them. Now, what has happened is that there were some consultations here and there, and the question was, what value will the UN, for example, add in the event that we ask them to help us in this particular process? And there's a possibility, of course, of procuring, but also what is most important is to provide that independent oversight on the process of printing of the ballot papers. But that is still a discussion that is ongoing, knowing very well that we have an existing contractual relationship with Al Ghurair. So can, for example, the UN bring on board experts who can watch over the printing for the sake of public confidence building in the electoral process?
So it will still be Al Ghurair?
At this particular point, we haven't changed that particular position. Yeah.
But there's a proposal to have UNDP source that.
Especially when it comes to quality assurance.
Yeah. Allow me to ask you 2 more questions. I know you're in a hurry to
move. We have.
But there's a very, I know, and you're working, but a very important question that has been put forward over and over again around the question of ICT, and transmission was a big issue. And a controversial position of the ICT manager, who at one point was either suspended but came back into office under unclear circumstances. Then there was a leaked memo indicating that the chair had, again, fired him or suspended him. And it's unclear what exactly is going on, and yet a very important position he holds. Can you clarify for us, ICT manager Muhati, is he still in office? Has he been suspended? Has he been fired? What's the position?
James is still in office. James is still in office. I think what the chair raised were some of the issues that were subject to discussion at the Commission level, which is also an internal administrative issue. So at this point, I will not want to talk much about that.
Yeah.
But he's in office, yeah.
He's in office. So there is a push and pull still. The war continues between the chair, the memos he's sending, and what we see posted by the IEBC account on Twitter.
I think it's important to know that every institution has got certain protocols. And the internal communication was internal communication. A lot of things go on here that we don't have to share with the public. So the fact that the memo got out in the public does not necessarily mean that's the actual position. And there's a lot of discussions going on many other things. So yes.
Allow me to ask, for Kenyans watching, and you say it's not the actual position, and yet it's a memo from the chair. This is the head of the IEBC. So what would be the actual position if not that from the chair?
But he hasn't communicated to Kenyans. The Kenyans must know that the internal communication at IEBC, which are done through the memos, the fact that the memo has been leaked, it only tells one side of the story, or the intention is to tell one side of the story, but an institution does not succeed by just looking at it from one side of the story. That's why we said on any issues that have been raised in the past, the Commission will be able to, at the right time, be able to communicate formally to Kenyans.
What do you attribute the leakages to? Because they're not doing good for the Commission. It just paints a picture of a Commission in disarray.
Well, I think some individuals I think some individuals who do not really pay attention to I would say, due process, I would say that. But it's a matter that we're investigating to see what actually happened. Whoever did that, of course, does not have the best interest of the organization at heart. And it doesn't matter how long it takes. We'll be able to track them down, and justice will be done.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Final question as we go, CEO, because one of the viewers calling in asking if officials who saw affidavits, you are one of the IEBC officials that saw affidavits that were submitted in the Supreme Court, and those issues were found to be untrue. For example, the security features, we saw Kasait saw several affidavits, and the court found that some of those orders they made were disobeyed. Shouldn't there be action taken against officials who were seen to have misled the court?
I don't know what you're stating, but we got our own position in terms of the Supreme Court position, which we have been analyzing, and we have a position on that. You saw an affidavit because you believe in the evidence that you're presenting before the court. At no point did we say that what we were swearing was inconsistent with what we believed in. So I can assure you that we have all our documents together. We are reviewing to see if there are any discrepancies between what we presented to court and what we also have. One of the things I can tell you is that, if you look at it, I think our position is still correct in terms of the nature of the documents that we presented. And if there were any discrepancies, I think we ably explained that, and we'll be revisiting that matter at the right time.
At the right time.
Thank you.
Plans for 26th of October? Kim's kits, are they the same?
The same kits. We are reconfiguring them, getting them ready, looking at some of the procedures that perhaps will enhance efficiency, and ensuring that we have as many forms as possible being transmitted this time around. We are working on training very hard, trying to see that the officers who are going to use the KIMS kit really follow procedure. So
it's the same arrows, POs?
Yeah, but of course based on performance. Some of them, of course, who had issues, we looked at some of the concerns. If we think that the issue that affected your processes is such that does not allow you to work for us again, we're also trying to deal with that particular issue. But one thing I can assure you is that we're getting ready for this, and we're going to succeed.
Because in the other petitions going on, some courts have urged that the KIMS kit be preserved for those proceedings. So does the Commission now intend to purchase other KIMS kits in such eventualities?
That has been a challenge, and what we're saying is that there's a bit of information gap between what the courts understand as the election material and what we understand. So last week we had a meeting with the Judiciary Committee on Elections that is chaired by Justice Mbogoli, and we explored this issue. Our position is that I think what is important is the data that is on those particular kits. It's not the hardware. So they should allow us to access the hardware. We prepared for purpose of the presidential election. We'll be able to retain information in the SD cards so that whoever needs or requires that particular information will be able to be availed with that particular information. Yeah. And so at the administrative level, the judiciary is aware. We are hoping that the judges also will be properly informed so that they make appropriate decisions that do not necessarily hamper our processes.
Yeah. Electronic transmission, how is that? Is there any update, upgrade?
Thank you very much. I think we've done our level best. Yeah. We're getting to improve our system, to increase coverage, and to ensure that transmission happens 100%.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We have definitely overstayed our welcome, but thank you for making the time, CEO IEBC Ezra Chilabo. He says they are preparing for the 26th October repeat presidential poll. It's business as usual here at the Anniversary Towers with all of their staff. Earlier on when we arrived, there were several demonstrators outside in the streets. But because they were getting closer and rowdier, the police who are manning these premises dispersed them using tear gas. So as we stand now, and perhaps we could just go closer to the other side and you could see outside the window, the streets completely cleared out, quiet, not your usual traffic, business as usual here along, what avenue? What street?